Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rash's World. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Bruce Hutchison. Welcome to Rash's World.
Hi, Arash. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. So I always get started here with a brief introduction. So if you can introduce yourself in a few words, how would you describe yourself in any way you see fit?
Okay, well, I'm Dr. Bruce Hutchison. I'm a retired clinical psychologist and became an author. I wrote the book called Emotions Don't Think, Emotional Contagion in a Time of Turmoil, because my training in psychology tells me that the emotions that are going on in the world and with people, with politicians, with the public, with a number of people in different places, those emotions are something that we can learn to deal with and understand. And instead, I think people are just kind of reacting to it impulsively, and which is typical for emotions. But if we're aware of how to manage the emotions and how to handle them, how to regulate them, we're likely going to be able to respond in a more effective, meaningful way that would be more constructive and helpful to people.
Absolutely. So your book again that we're going to talk about today is Emotions Don't Think, Emotional Contagion in a Time of Turmoil.
Right.
Definitely true about emotions. I mean, and that's actually they're made to be not different from thinking. They just have basically a mind of their own. And but the problem is really trying to kind of control certain parts of it, or kind of to sift through and see like what are some of the emotions we want, because your passion for this topic and writing the book is one of those positive emotions, and then there are also negative ones that are destructive, and we can, as you mentioned in your book, turmoil. This is
Yes.
definitely true. We just have to look outside of the window and you see there's a lot of turmoil. Looking at the news, watching the news, there is a lot going on. So let's talk first about emotional contagion, because I really like that term that you talk about.
Okay. Okay. Well, that term's been around for a while now, but I don't think it's as people are as knowledgeable about that term as they should be, because emotions are contagious. Emotions will rub off on people.
Mhm.
So when something's going on and someone feels emotional about something, it can be anger, it can be happiness, it can be a whole number of emotions. And if you're picking that up or aware of it in the vicinity of it, you may start to feel those feelings yourself. And that comes from the mirror neurons that we carry inside us, right? And that kind of reflect back and absorb the emotions that are being expressed. So we kind of pick it up and have a milder version of it ourselves. And so, and my point is, it doesn't have to be automatic.
Mhm. Mhm.
It doesn't happen to everyone automatically. And so there's a reason why, it doesn't, because people are trained not to do that. There are many professions, including my own as a psychologist and others, journalists perhaps, and lawyers and many others who don't absorb the emotion that they're interviewing someone's expressing as they're being interviewed. So, because if they did, then that would be ineffective for them. They couldn't write the story, or they couldn't manage the case in court, or whatever it was. If they started to feel strong feelings from the person, they would, for example, if someone started to cry, they couldn't very well handle the court case.
Mhm.
Um, so I think the people, that's part of their training, is that they're trained not to do that.
Mhm.
I can recall attending a meeting when I was working in the hospital about a patient, and the patient had a lot of difficulties, of course, and so, but because of a situation, the lawyer had to attend, and the lawyer was the one who got most emotional about what was going on,
Mhm.
felt sympathy about it, had a hard time handling it because of the emotion. But most of us who were practitioners and in the field were familiar with these kinds of emotions and could handle it well. So if we can handle it well, then others can do so as well. Now, this is certainly not to blame anybody, and blame is another sense of emotion. It's just part of the way things go in life, and we can't all be perfect, of course, or we'd be robots, but we can learn how to regulate, manage, and handle emotions, especially when people in life are becoming, as you say, more critical, more emotional about issues that come up that we see in life all the time now in the last few years.
So the term of contagious is very appropriate here, because, and it could go both ways, because we see it when we go out and we're smiling, and so it's contagious, and so these are the positive vibes that we are sending out. However, the opposite is true too. The anger, when somebody's angry and they elicit angry responses. One of the things that I've noticed with myself, and again as well as others, but myself as an example, that I'm often also triggered by certain things, certain comments, certain things cause a reaction.
Yeah,
But when you talk about management, it's absolutely true of not instinctively or reacting to it, but
right,
kind of taking a time out and looking at it and saying, I don't have to react this way. I have a choice. I don't
exactly.
have to respond to that in that way. Once I've done that, I've encountered anger, but when I've answered with in a calm presence, the anger dissipated from the other person. So
Yes,
I think that is something that a lot of us don't have the skills, and this is where your work is so important to kind of teach us to manage and regulate that. But I think it's also a lot of people don't know that they actually do have a lot of control over their emotions to a large
right.
degree.
Right. No, they don't. No, they don't. They think they have, but they don't. But they can get it.
Mhm,
And that's what we're talking about here.
mhm,
And so one of the ways to do that is to be aware of what the other person is doing.
mhm.
They're being emotional. It may not be purposeful. It may be a habit, maybe subconscious. But if they're being angry, they're getting emotional in an angry way. They're swearing and cursing and so on. And they do that for a reason. And again, it may not be a conscious thing, or it may be conscious, I don't know, but whatever, there's a purpose there.
Mhm,
And if you can realize that and not react to them the way they want,
mhm.
then things can be turned around in a 180 degree in a matter of a few moments. What they want is they're looking for a fight. They're looking
Yes,
for an
yes,
argument,
exactly.
right?
But here's the rub. There are people who are very good at manipulating us. There are
Yes.
people who are driving us. So when I look, for example, in a courtroom, and just the whole trial is just emotion. I mean, you're appealing to the emotions of the jury, you're appealing to the
Yeah.
emotions of the judge. And
Yeah.
I'm actually worried about that, because I'm thinking you're being swayed not
Good.
by reason, not by making the
No.
just decision. You're swayed by emotions, and that's the same
Yeah.
way in politics. When people vote for
Yeah.
people, they seem nice. I like the way this person speaks. I like the way they look. I like this person because he or she is famous. And
Yeah.
it's not based on principles. And that is worrisome. It's not just recent. This has been going on for quite some time. And
Yes.
we've had it in the past too, where you say, this person seems tough. I like tough. Therefore, I'm going to vote for this person, regardless of what they stand for.
Yeah.
So that is, especially in
Exactly.
those moments, we're making, it's very dangerous. We're making
It's
a lot
very
of errors.
it's very dangerous, but people may not be aware of why it's dangerous, because they're voting in a way blindly. Now, I introduced a term in my book called emotional voting.
Mhm.
Now, the press will not touch this with a 10-foot pole, maybe because they're not aware of it or they don't want to deal with it. I don't know. But I once wrote a letter. I like to write letters to the editor. And so I wrote a letter to say, point out that, people, elections are not a place to vote against someone. They're a place to vote for someone.
Yes, yes.
So, interestingly enough, the newspaper put the words against and for in italics to emphasize what I was saying.
Yeah.
So good for them, because if you vote against someone, well, you may be getting someone in then who's, not as desirable as the person you're voting out, without really knowing who you're voting for. And so in emotional voting, what we get is that the idea of comfort and terms that go along with that, like poetry, poetic information, rhyming, comfort from talking to people and talking in nice language and things like that. That's what sways the voter, not the content of the words. So I say, well, but what happened to policy here?
Mhm.
Okay, so policy has gone out the window. Okay,
Mhm.
I'm sure that if you took a nice trip out in Vancouver where you're living and in the mountains and enjoying it and appreciating it and had a nice time with a politician, that you probably end up voting for that person because you
Mhm.
enjoyed the
Mhm.
trip.
Yes, yes,
And right, and so, but that doesn't make any sense,
yeah.
right? And we know that as a fact, because as you say, it's not new. Vance Packard wrote the book back in the 50s, 60s about hidden persuaders.
Mhm.
And I've had a number of people tell me about that book and remind me about that book. And where he talked about the different ways that advertising can affect us in an unconscious way.
Mhm.
And the same thing happens in politics.
Mhm.
And so we have to be aware of that and be aware not to accept it that way. Be aware of the phenomenon as it's going on. Intellectual knowledge about something that exists is not enough. We have to be able to identify it as it's happening.
Yes, yes. But I think it's like really also looking at the emotions, because we're being swayed without awareness of emotions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And just to kind of, I think part of the problem is really because we are not in touch with our emotions.
No.
Because when we see a situation that elicits anger, in my view, there's something else that's inside that person. That person is unhappy. That person wants
Yes.
an outlet. So that's why
Yes.
we call it a trigger, because they're already ready to react and they're just
Yes.
waiting to pounce. So
Yes.
the issue is really like, and the media is not helping and not blaming them, but this is also part of their job because social media does the same thing. They want emotional responses and it
Yeah.
helps them and their business because media is a business. But it's also it's our responsibility to not fall into that trap. And
Exactly.
I think part of us is in our society, we have to really open up to emotions and being able to process them, to deal with them, to realize what do I really feel. And one of the main issues, and I'd like to see your point on this, your point of view, is I think we feel so insecure that we want to conform to others,
Yeah.
so that it's basically now, if we're looking at specifically the US, there are basically two choices. You're either on this side or on this side, and you try to please that group, whatever it is. And no matter how extreme the views are going, you say, I don't want to be left out. I will follow that group. And that
Mm-hmm.
is very dangerous because it's creating this artificial, I would say, artificial divide
It
of
is.
people because they just want to please their group.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're
Mm-hmm.
not pleasing them,
Mm-hmm.
then they feel left out.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fast thinking that's going on because when people are observing something on TV or in a newspaper or video of someone speaking, they have fast thinking. It's clickbait thinking. And so, and that doesn't think through things. So, for example, when I guess I better name him because he's all over the news constantly. When Donald Trump was a president, I don't like naming people because it brings up a lot of emotion just by itself. I avoid naming any presidents in the book, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to bring up the emotions about it. But when he was speaking about people in an emotional way, it triggers off other people's emotions right away, automatically. And once you get into that emotion mind, Marsha Linehan, who's a psychologist who talks about emotions in the therapy she does, has identified a concept called emotion mind, is when emotions take over the mind. And, and then what happens then is people get into that emotion mind when they're reacting to an emotional comment that Trump made or somebody else makes who's controversial. Right away, how can they dare do that? What's going on? Blah, 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 right? And then they get into this emotional sense, and then they've lost their thinking.
Yeah.
They've lost their critical thinking skills, or they haven't lost them. I'm doing it myself. They're just in abeyance, okay? And so we have to then bring them back. Yes, we know this is going on. but we think more slowly and rationally, and we say, let's think about this in ways that can be reasonable. This is not a very helpful way to think. We would say to someone who's doing those things, thinking that way. But when you get into this pure emotion, you get what happened on January the 6th
Yeah.
in the US, right? And in Ottawa last February.
Yes.
And in various places around the world.
Yeah.
With Brexit, and you get emotional kind of decisions.
Yeah.
And I just shake my head about those things. It's unfortunate, but let me also put this into perspective. I try and take a neutral stand here. Okay, I'm not favoring any particular political party or any particular movement. I think,
Same
as
here.
you said, this has been going on for a long time. It went on in 2015 when Trudeau was elected here in Canada. There was an emotional thing because they compared him to the previous person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's often this contrast effect that goes on in politics where you vote someone different than the person you had before.
And that's the issue. That's the issue, because we have black and white thinking,
Yeah.
and that is not correct. And both sides are responsible for this. And so when we get someone like Trump, so I'll be honest here. I think Biden is kind of like the stern father who's sometimes kind of maybe limiting, but also reasonable, but also judgmental in his own way.
Yeah.
And Trump seems to be like the estranged brother or the crazy uncle that would say stuff and so on. But at the same time, some of the stuff that he's, to be honest, and when you're looking at things in a logical way, some of the stuff is not wrong. It's not necessarily that anything that that person would say would be wrong. And that's something I've learned, that people who I disagree with, sometimes there is a certain level of agreement, or at least a certain level of understanding on my part. I know why you're saying this, but this is why I think you're not right. But you can have your own points of view, but it's just the shutting down. It's like, no discourse. We won't talk to you. We will ban you. And that's not helping, because what it does is, when we look at the cultural war, I think that this attitude is really creating more divide. And I think that the side, it's like watching the World Cup where my team is losing. And I say, like, it seems like that. It seems like that because you're radicalizing things on both sides, you're losing a lot of people that could be won over. And I say, rather find a compromise. Don't create more divide. Find common grounds, because when you look at it, in the end, there's so much agreement in both parties. Again, the case of the US, both parties have so much that they actually agree on, but they're focusing on the little parts that they disagree with, and that's overblown.
Yeah, there's various movements out now to improve communication in various ways, but they haven't hit the mainstream yet. There's an approach called sidewalk epistemology.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, where some people, they can go on the sidewalk and talk to people who are controversial, who take extreme positions, but they talk to them in a very interesting, friendly way.
Yes.
Right? They don't just come along and say, you're wrong, and criticize them. They have a whole approach. Now, my experience as a psychologist says, well, why don't we incorporate that kind of stuff in psychology, in therapy, but politically, therapy is thought of as a negative because people think it takes that medical or moral approach where it finds fault in the person, says they're sick. I say, no, they're not sick. No, that's crazy. No, we're all equal here. No, I can't say crazy because that's I'm talking myself into trouble here. That's just being normal, spontaneous talk, right? Yeah, we have to be careful when we're talking, but you can talk to people in ways, and I agree with you, there's always an element of truth in what somebody is saying. And when we had the vaccine mandate controversy here, I've written letters about this. I think the term mandate is the wrong term to use.
Right. Yes.
Right? Because it puts people off. It tells them, you don't have any say in the matter. I'm going to tell you what to do. And we as adults don't want to be talked to that way because we know we have a free democracy and we can make our own choices, we think. But no, not really, because we have laws to follow. So I think, well, let's change the term mandate and call it a requirement. Now, we've used that word for decades, and we're all familiar with it. We're required to pay for our groceries. No one's saying it's a mandate, but we'll all take it for granted. So what about taking a different approach to this vaccine problem and say, well, it certainly is an important thing to have a vaccine, to have a vaccination. We're going to point out all the different benefits about it, and say as a result, we're making it a requirement for people to have a vaccination. Okay. And I would have no difficulty if my wife and I have had 5 vaccinations already. And and we're not catching the flu or cold, COVID, nothing. So even though people around us are getting the various ailments. But who knows, maybe we still catch it. It's still, one of those things that can happen. But I never took it as a mandate. I just thought it was common sense, right? I just ignored that mandate part. If I reacted to it in an angry way, then that wouldn't work.
Words matter. How you phrase things, especially for politicians, and that's why that crazy uncle does not make a good politician in that sense of like not being diplomatic, of like stoking fears and anger and so on. And that works maybe for wrestling matches, but it doesn't work in politics. And I think we have to also find people who are adequate for the job. As a politician, you cannot be swayed by emotions, and you should not use emotions to get to power and to control people.
Because emotions don't think.
Yes.
Yeah, which is the title of my book.
Yes.
And I think that people, when they see the word emotions, the phrase emotions, to them that's a soft topic. It doesn't mean much. And where my point is, not only is it not soft, it's not only a hard topic, but it's a critical topic. When you think of it, emotional contagion, negative emotional contagion has been responsible for the deaths of millions of people in world wars and various wars over the years. Okay? Not to mention all the shootings that go on. And it's just pathetic and sad and tragic. And people then get angry about the shooters, the warmongers and the killers, and say nothing good about them. And then people get caught up in these ideas, as you were saying earlier, of the divisiveness, which comes in the terms pro and con, right? And so people are labeled pro or con, pro-birth, anti-Semitic, pro this, anti that, okay? Pro-Canadian, anti-Canadian, okay, pro-American, anti-American. Well, this is ridiculous.
It's a black and white thinking again. Either this or that, but it's like thinking inside a box, and I don't like the box.
No,
and so when things happen, I tend to do this. I play the devil's advocate, and I've talked to people who I said, I convinced them that there is a God, and then when they actually convert to religion, I tried the opposite of saying, no, wait, you want to rethink this. There isn't a God, but it's kind of like Socrates, of like kind of stimulating thought and realizing what is it you really think and believe in, instead of just following someone. And that's the problem with a lot of this conformity. We follow others. We want a leader to tell us what to think, how to behave, and so on. Don't do that. No. You can do it yourself, but how can we get in touch with those emotions? I have my own methods, but I would like to know, how can we deal with those emotions so we don't fall into that trap? We're not easily led or misled in this case. What can we do?
Yeah, well, we have to take our own empowerment upon ourselves, so we have the ability to feel and be empowered. Empowerment doesn't mean that we're, have a lot of power, we're going to take over the world. That's not true empowerment. Empowerment is kind of like an individual thing. Everyone has an ability to influence everyone else.
Yeah.
And they already are doing that, whether they know it or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Look at all the people who are homeless and how much influence they have just by sitting there.
Yeah.
You know, and on the sidewalk in Vancouver, as you know, and in other cities in across the Canada and the US. It's very sad, but they have power. And so the power comes in the effect that they give other people. But that will be temporary, and which is the problem here.
But we're
So
giving it away. We're giving that power away. We don't realize it. We often give it away to like others, and we let others control us in many ways, or we're led by what they think. What do they want? And I speak of personal experience where I think that what others think was very important to me, so I would try to please them. And that was something. I never say no. Whatever they say, even if it's tough, I will accept it. More hours, okay, I'll do it. But then in the end, I'm just hurting myself. And the other person's thoughts, I can't control anyway, whether I try or not. That's their own business. And it's like the serenity prayer. It's like there are things I can control and things I cannot. I cannot control what others think and what others do, but I can do it with myself. If I realize it, that is.
But as you say, it's not black or white thinking.
Yes, it is.
So it's shades of gray thinking.
Yes, that's right.
You can persuade people, you can influence people. You know, we know that we're all influenced every day by hundreds of advertisements and logos and colors and sounds and things like that we hear and see all the time. So if we're influenced that way, and as we said earlier, even the politicians can do that and influence us to do certain things, then we do have that ability to influence others and be influenced by them. But it's not complete control. We can decide not to be influenced by someone. You know, and when you think of it in common ways, we all have our favorite color.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see your tree behind you and all the beautiful colors on the tree there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can look at the blue and the purple that I enjoy, and makes me feel good. The other ones, not so much, but that's okay. We all have our favorite colors, and right? Yeah. And so, but we can train ourselves to enjoy red and gold and other colors as well. And so in life, it's the same way. We can see the positives in everything, including the things that people are upset about. Emotional contagion and emotional affection will occur when people let the anger they have toward a certain action or a certain person color their whole attitude about that person.
Yeah. There's a lot of judgment too. And one thing that a lot of is we don't even realize, but one term that I really found fascinating was stereotype threat. So that when you are interacting, let's say, with a person with a minority or with a person of color, there's immediately a threat to be perceived as a stereotype of that race. And that already creates tension to begin with. So that conversation will most likely not go well, because we have all these judgments that are within us, and we're not listening to the other person. We're not experiencing them. We're just seeing them through a filter that is actually very distorted. And going back to some of the people who are, again, who have these extremist views, overall, they're actually pretty good people. They're caring parents, they caring siblings, and so on. They help others. They're altruistic. So let's tap into that and just kind of find that common ground of like getting through to people instead of building on that anger and judging people. And again, this goes on both sides. There's constant judgment. And I get judged too. And I'm thinking, okay, but it shouldn't affect me. One thing I really liked about, there's a basketball film with, I think, Adam Sandler, he's training this basketball player. And so he would be easily swayed by emotions when they said, like, your mother is a so-and-so and so on. And then he would miss shots after that. But he trained him. And he says, okay, I'm going to say this, but these are just words. They don't actually mean anything if you don't let them. And then once people would insult him, and he would be fine and he would still score because he still had the power of overcoming that. And I see that as a way of, we can really train ourselves if we are aware, aware.
exactly. I like to use the analogy of a dodgeball
Oh,
to
cool.
handle this kind of thing, right? If you're playing dodgeball, the ball will hit you and bounce off you.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's not good because you haven't dodged it, but big deal. It just bounces off you. Okay. Nobody's hurt. It's just a rubber ball.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you could catch the ball and throw it back, or you could even catch the ball and keep it and hug the ball. So the same thing can happen with emotions when they hit you. Okay, you need to learn to let it bounce off you. Like water will bounce off a duck's back. Okay, and that way the duck is intact. So that way it's important. But if you keep the emotion, it's probably because you like to keep it. If the ball comes to you and you enjoy the feel of the ball and you want to hold it, then somebody else is going to say, well, come on, it's my turn, my turn. So then you're being so selfish in a way. But the point is that you can use that analogy to learn how to handle emotions. So when I'm speaking, and when you're speaking, Arash, we can feel your emotion. Maybe you can feel mine. I don't know. But anyway, you can decide whether or not you want to keep that emotion, let it come into you in a contagious way or not. Whether you don't like it or it's not for you, then you decide not to. You block it, right? And that way it works out for you in ways that would be constructive.
But also to be open to that and saying, okay, I do have my views, but maybe something that you're saying would resonate with me, and I might be open to change and go in that direction instead of like saying fix that I got all the answers, or you say I have all the answers, but then there's again no interaction there. And I like the bouncing off. But I think dodgeball is actually the term is wrong, because the goal of the game is not to dodge it, it's actually to catch it. Catch the ball, so that's misleading there.
Yeah. Labels are often misleading.
There you go. Yeah. I think so. You call this the invisible enemy, right? So this is like all these emotions that are driving us, and in the wrong directions too. And most likely, we probably don't want to go there, but because we're swayed, we just end up taking that wrong path.
Yeah, exactly. People don't really realize that the emotions are doing this. And I'm trying to raise awareness about this. I can read a number of columns and editorials about all the various issues going on that we're talking about. I never read the word emotion in them. But emotion is really the problem here. And but because it's invisible, people don't really realize it's important. Emotion comes out in the voice and in the emphasis, the tone, the pitch of the voice, and that's important. And so we have to be aware of that as people are speaking. And so it's natural and normal to feel that. But if you're aware of it, you can say, I'm going to let that emotion bounce off me. I don't like that emotion. It doesn't fit me as a person. And then we can handle it in a different way. So in my book, I talk about how to handle hate and demoralization and fear and all the other emotions that people deal with in a public way. I have 5 chapters at the end about how to overcome emotional contagion. And throughout my many other chapters, I talk about it. And people can pick up different hints there. I talk about situations that have happened in life, from cancel culture to public shaming and things like that. So now the present term is woke, right? You're not supposed to be woke. Well, I'd rather be woke than asleep. But I don't know why politicians haven't picked that part up, because
but
somehow.
But my view is slightly different there. And because for me, like the emotions, and when we also say this is good and bad, we're judging it. And the emotions have a mind of their own. They have a power that they elude thought, they elude control. Otherwise, we'd be happy, but we can't. Often we are not, because the emotional factor is so important. So my approach has been feel the emotion, go with it, go into it. And then what you realize is that the emotion will kind of go away on its own. instead of trying to control it, because it's again the crazy uncle. Go with them and then feel that, and then release it, let it go.
Yeah.
And that has been liberating, because once I practiced that, the emotions don't come back anymore in that sense. And it's not that controlled, because the firm control, and even the term clinical has like a negative connotation there, clinical psychologist, right? But I would think like a mix of both, of like working together again, the head with the heart, because the heart has its own reasons too. And so a crucial point is your lack of self-esteem. And would you think that's an issue of thought, or is it an issue of emotions, or maybe is it both?
It's both. Yeah,
Okay.
it's both. Yeah.
So that's complicated again. So when we try, and I completely agree with critical thinking, right? I think that's hugely important, and I think we don't have enough of it.
No.
But at the same time, critical thinking on its own, without the emotion, I find it pretty sterile and perhaps even useless, because it doesn't resonate with people. You can be very logical, but it doesn't, again, with the jury, it doesn't convince the jury. You need to have a bit of both, a kind of mix and match, I guess.
Yeah, and that's called wisdom. When we take a combination of emotion and critical thinking or systematic reasoning, we come up with sentiment and wisdom. And because wisdom involves, kind of learning from someone's emotional experience and extrapolating that to real life and various situations where it can be helpful, and knowing where it may not be helpful. And that's flexibility of thought. And that's crucial, that flexibility of thought. I agree with you. The idea of accepting your emotion and going with it is one, I think there's a lot of value in what you're saying, but
and not saying acting on it, though. I want to make that precise, right? So not like, grab the gun and go shoot people. No, but in your space, give yourself the freedom to feel anything. If you feel a violent impulse, feel it. Don't act on it, right? So please, I want to make that very clear, right? Do not act on it, but feel it, and give yourself that space, and don't judge. And that's something I think with mindfulness we are going through, where you say, I will accept any emotions that comes up, no matter how horrendous it may seem. And because we also think that we are pure and we're good. And then these like emotions come in, and it's like cognitive dissonance. Or like, I thought I was good, but why do I feel like I want to kill this person? But be okay with that feeling itself, because it has a cause, it has a reason, it's some sort of experience that you've been carrying along. Just once you do that, then you will feel relieved. And it's the pressure cooker, it just like builds in steam, and then you lose control.
I would suggest taking that away from the action part and putting it into the emotional part. So I want to kill that person. What that means is that you're very angry.
Yes.
Okay, so let's identify that anger and work at it. It's okay to be angry, right? It's a normal emotion.
But why do you have that feeling? For me, it's like digging into it. Like, why? Why specifically that person? What is it about their comment, their being, their attitude? Like a kind of exploration.
Yeah.
And I found that most of my fears, I think pretty much all of my fears, have a different background, different story. And once I deal with that, then the fear is gone.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. It's magic. And that's something, again, and this is why you're doing your work too, because there's an element of frustration too, because you have something that works well. I've had various people on my podcast who know that things that work well, but a lot of people are not listening. They're not paying attention, but it does work.
Exactly. Yes, it does work. It's important. It's crucial. And so I like what you're saying. So unfortunately, I think a lot of people are what I call emotion phobic. They don't want to deal with their emotions.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Right. And so when they hear the topic, they don't want to deal with that. So so that's a concern, because when you don't deal with something, it takes over.
That's it. That's it. Exactly.
If you don't deal with that snow that's coming to you, you're going to have problems.
We try to avoid conflict, but we actually have to dive in there. It's necessary.
Yes, exactly. Otherwise, we get turmoil. And when the politicians and the journalists and the public don't deal with the emotions that's going on out there in society, and emotions are certainly flying high and strong in the last few years, especially with the pandemic and all the other issues that go out there, then they're not dealing with it and it gets worse.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so you have to identify it and talk about it and learn how to deal with it.
Yes.
Which is why I'm writing my book, to help people do that. We're taking it out of the clinical mode and putting it into the everyday public mode. Okay? And my book is groundbreaking in that way because I'm talking about a psychological approach to living in society and in life. Right? And so that's crucial. Now, we know here that I say in my book that no laws will help with emotional contagion. No medication will help with emotional contagion.
It's true.
It's something that we have to learn to handle on our own. Laws are ways of superimposing something from outside on us, which we don't like. And medication takes away from us our ability to handle things because it affects our body in many ways and our mind. So certainly, don't get me wrong, it's not all or nothing, like you said. Laws are important, medications are important. So in our society, in different ways, when we hear people say these kind of things, they say, "Oh, he's against medication," or "He's against laws." No, not at all.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Exactly. I think it's also like traffic signs, because they're there and we follow them, but if we don't follow them, they're completely useless. And I saw one moment where the traffic just went down because the lights didn't work. They were all flashing green on all sides, and the drivers were completely confused. They're like, what do we do now? So and that shows me that laws are so important because they give us some sort of guidance. It's like, okay, now this happens, now this happens. Of course, we want to adjust them and modify them to again suit better what the society wants, but they're necessary. And these rules and regulations, we need to follow them, because if we don't, then it's chaos. And we had that on January 6th. The rules are there for a reason, but we can modify them. We can change them in a productive way, in a constructive way as well.
Exactly. Yes. The rules are important. They're not personal. They're not against us.
That's it.
They help us, right?
Yes.
And so, agree. So that's a good point. People are often, when they're against rules, then they take it personally. They think that they're being restrained.
And then, I mean, when you also say limitations, putting limitations on emotions, I immediately react and it's like, no, I don't want to put limitations, right? There's that kind of instinctive reaction. It's like, why you say, mandate, as you said earlier, the term mandate does not help. So it's so important to realize that, but also our own reactions, and then find a way of managing that, I would think.
Exactly. So allow me to get my book off the shelf and so people can see it.
So just to let everyone know, it's called Emotions Don't Think: Emotional Contagion in a Time of Turmoil. And by the looks of it, and just with our discussion, it's a wonderful book. I haven't read it yet, but I will put it on my reading list. There we go.
Okay. Thank you.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hutchison, for being on Arash's World. It's been an absolute pleasure, and just so much insight and wisdom here that you've shared with the audience. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for having me on, Arash. I've enjoyed it.
For sure. Thank you.
Yeah.